Good morning, William and Mary. Hello. Welcome to everyone who's joining us here in this wonderful auditorium and to those who may be joining us remotely. I'm Catherine Rowe. I'm honored to serve as your president of this extraordinary 330-year-old institution. And the topic for our presidential conversation today is democracy and the media, an incredibly pressing topic right now. In a moment, we're going to be joined by 4 distinguished alumni who are coming to us from around the world. Their work is defining the best of journalism in the 21st century. And so when you listen to them, I want you to think about who they are as our former students and who our students are as their former colleagues. For 330 years, William and Mary has been educating human beings to be responsible and active participants in an increasingly pluralistic democracy, where freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and academic freedom are the essential components of the contest of ideas that fuels positive change in our country. That is the core of how we think of this republic. These are core principles, and they're the place where universities and journalism intersect in the commitment to facts as a public good. So we're going to be talking today about democracy in the media. The why of that, I want to set the stage for right now. And then in a moment, I'm going to welcome the Associate VP for Student Affairs, Dr. Drew Stelgis, to talk a little bit more about the democracy initiative that's ongoing at William and Mary. But here's where we are at this moment. In 4 years, we are going to be celebrating as a country the 250th anniversary of our founding, the semi-quincentennial, or if you prefer less Latinate language, more forward-looking language, the quarter millennium. All right, so I like quarter millennium because it is looking forward and because it mixes Anglo-Saxon and Latinate roots. Literary scholars love that. At that moment, this town is going to be a destination for millions of visitors. And the question that we're asking, the reason that democracy is one of the pillars of Vision 2026, is that over those 4 years, it is on us, incumbent on us as a community, and all those who are joining us remotely, even by phone, it is incumbent on us to define the institution we want the country to see. That is, I think now, the most important cradle of our democracy. I grew up in Boston. I raised my kids in Philadelphia. And the stories that we have to tell about the founding of this country in Williamsburg are the most important right now for our country. The human beings who founded this university and who founded our country grew their ideas here. Not as expansively or perfectly as we want, but it is our business to expand them and make them more perfect. So we have 4 years under the current strategic plan, Vision 2026, and one of our key areas of focus will be programming and research and partnerships that sustain democracy. And this presidential conversation is one part of that. So let we welcome Dr. Stelgis. Come join me. Thank you. Great to have you here. Have a seat. So we're going to talk just for a few minutes about how we're thinking about advancing the impact of our graduates and our current students on democracy in a positive way going forward. And then you're going to moderate a conversation with our extraordinary alumni.
Very much looking forward to it.
Yes. So kick it off for us.
Sure. Well, I would love to tell you just a little bit about what we're doing specifically in student affairs with regard to the democracy initiative. And then I have a few questions for you as well.
That's great.
So we're really just thrilled that there's sort of an aligning of opportunities. This is what we're talking about with regard to the democracy initiative is in part what is part of the DNA of the university. It is both historic, but it also is also future focused. And within student affairs, specifically what we're doing is we're introducing some of the most cutting edge work in both psychological sciences, but also behavioral sciences into the student experience from before day one. So for example, we have partnered with the Constructive Dialogue Institute, and they are a nonprofit organization that operates to help us understand both the mindset and the behaviors of individuals across the world and across cultures when they are met with stimuli that is challenging. And so the lessons that we are using from them, where we're learning about first about the psychology of the mind, and then about the skill sets that you can build to be better in discussion, are the platform for us to then have really robust, important, and significant conversations in the residence halls, in this beautiful new student union, across the campus, whether it be at 8 in the morning or 2 in the morning. It's an opportunity for students to learn through practice how to have better discussions. We're also partnering with the Aspen Institute, which we're so proud of, with respect to their Better Arguments project, where we're learning about principles for dialogue and discussion. This is just the foundation and the beginning. The real substance is what it was really, I think, the special sauce about William and Mary, is bringing this into the classroom so students can engage with their faculty in more thoughtful, robust ways where everyone feels included.
So the ambition there is to become known in this country as a place where open debate thrives, where opinions from across different experiences, backgrounds, perspectives can come together and be wrestled with. Honorable people disagree with each other. We sometimes offend each other, and we can correct that. We learn from those experiences. Our ideas improve as a result of exchanges that build on conflict in a positive way. So we're teaching students, our premise is human beings need to learn how to lean into conflict and respect it, how to learn from ideas that are very divergent from their own. That is a learning practice that's particularly important for young adults, as well as for adults in the 21st century.
We're aspirational in our efforts. We really want to become, because we think we should be and can be, a leading convener on this across the country. And this work is important. I can't imagine, you could argue, I can't imagine anything more important than this. I have a few questions for you.
Okay, ask away.
And I'm excited to ask you these questions. So we in a few minutes, we'll have the company of our distinguished alumni journalists as part of Homecoming. And in your opinion, what role does the media play in democracy around the world?
Well, I think Walter Cronkite famously said, freedom of the press is not important to democracy, it is democracy. Just the way education at a university, a commitment to facts and shared facts, testing of ideas rigorously is democracy. It's not just important to democracy. And when we are talking to any journalist right now, you know that what they're working to do is to help define the public sphere that we're in, which is different from the public sphere in which our founders first imagined a democracy. The big worry then, as I know as a 16th century scholar, was that misinformation could be distributed at scale because the printing press was taking off. Print was really cheap. Many people could read. And if something was wrong that was shared, that could change the minds wrongly at scale of many human beings. And we're seeing that phenomenon again in a very powerful way with the new technologies of communication that we're in. Our press is incredibly important in teaching human beings how to navigate that new public sphere as citizens. When you look at a graph, it's an argument, not a statement of facts, right? That's what we also, as we think about new curriculum at William & Mary, are committed to developing an essential liberal arts skill to be able to navigate new technologies of communication. And the media is right there at the forefront.
You had mentioned this so elegantly in your opening remarks about freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But I have a question for you specifically related to that, because I think it's going to tee up our journalists nicely. And what does freedom of expression and speech and not censorship, why does that matter so much in higher education?
We have to test our ideas. We have to come to changing environments, new technology, with the humility to assume that we may not be right. And freedom to publish tested thinking, investigation, that's what freedom of the press is for. Without that, we don't, as individuals and collectively, have the freedom to know and to learn.
We are also in a place right now where we can think about how we can become even more of a leader in this space. And so how do you think we are uniquely positioned to be a leader in this space?
Right there ahead of you. So think back to the founding of Phi Beta Kappa
Yeah.
by William and Mary students. We think of that now as an honor society that's celebrating academic excellence. It was founded to convene human beings around the first version of what academic freedom meant, which is the freedom to debate ideas, get things wrong, and change your thinking in a community of practice, a community of thinkers that's working to do the same thing without the terrible costs that might be incurred by dissent, for dissent in the 16th century. Phi Beta Kappa was formed around the importance of dissenting thinking. And if we think of that now, many human beings at that time weren't in that circle of inclusion in open dissenting thinking. What it means for a pluralistic democracy to extend that broadly is what we're about here at William and Mary right now. It's an essential to, I think, to the future of our university that we take a lead because we have that history in defining how we hold open broadly the space for outlandish ideas, ideas to be tested and changed. You all know, and this is especially true in the social media world of shaming right now. You all know that if you go out with a half-formed thought, you could pay a price for that. Our students know that. And there's a terrible cost to that at a university today that none of us incurred at university. That a half-formed thought, a malformed thought, could end up being a source of shame. Ideas in progress could be slammed, flamed, because they're not yet perfectly formed. We need to hold open the space for ideas in progress, for half-formed thoughts, for argument. That's what we're about. And that's what the future is going to require of our democracy.
I have one more question for
Sure.
you. And it's about Vision 2026.
Yes.
And I watched with and participated with such enthusiasm over the several year process of developing Vision 2026.
30 or 40 open sessions for faculty, staff, students, alumni, neighbors. I see neighbors in this room here. Yes.
And I love being a part of sort of this really inclusive and involved and exhaustive experience. And that being said, I want to sort of use this as a way to start the conversation with our journalists is why is it so important that this is one of the university's key priorities as you came to collect all this information and see that this is something really significant for this university and these communities?
Well, let me add to this discussion. We talked about the history of William and Mary. Let me add the current and future of William and Mary in the current public sphere. The knowledge base to be able to navigate the flows of information at scale and distinguish misinformation from facts or from persuasive arguments. That knowledge base is the knowledge base of citizenship. It's what's going to protect every community. It's what's going to make every organization or company successful. Across William and Mary in so many different disciplines, we learned through the strategic planning process. We have data scientists, we have people studying social media, we have philosophers thinking about privacy and the ethics of algorithms. That is a new convening space in the liberal arts. Broadly speaking, the toolkit of data sciences, computational modeling, and statistical analysis, matched with any domain of knowledge, is what's going to be a prerequisite for critical thinking, for citizenship, for professional life. And we could see and hear in those many conversations so many parts of William and Mary convening in that space. So when you see the rest of the strategic plan, you'll see data, for example, an invitation to every discipline to think about how those quantitative methods work in their discipline to advance critical thinking. Writing is a form of thinking, making a graph is a form of thinking. Right? So we are aiming to educate citizens who have that broad range of skill sets to be able to grapple with rapid technology change to advance the democratic values that we are talking about today.
Well, I want to speak on behalf of my colleagues to say thank you for convening that group, such an inclusive group for so long. And now what it's given us is it's given us a roadmap. It's given us a roadmap to both practically implement, but it's also really inspiring. And I'm grateful to you and to everyone else who was involved with that. So thank you for this.
Thanks. It's a near term. We are at the programming and design development stage. It's not a blueprint that's perfectly mapped out already where you can see what every room is and what happens in each room. It's also an invitation to you in the community, Vision 2026, to say, here's a way we can advance this goal in partnership, perhaps, with others in this community. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the research side of democracy. In Williamsburg, we have three entities: the city, Colonial Williamsburg, and William and Mary, who have deep prowess in discovery of the history of our country. And the history that we have to tell is new. I'll give you the example of the extraordinary dig at the foundations of First Baptist Church, the oldest still existing congregation of faith for African Americans in this country, or the Bray School, the oldest schoolhouse for enslaved and free African American children in the hemisphere, here, discovered inside a William and Mary building. These are discoveries that will teach us about our past and also what our future should be. And William and Mary is seething with this kind of new research. So what we will have to show the country in 4 years, in the quarter millennium, is really extraordinary.
Well, please join me in thanking President Rowe for both ideas and inspiration.
Thank you. And I'm so looking forward to the alumni who are going to join us just a moment.
All right, everyone, it's really fun to be able to now share with you where we're going to learn at homecoming from our alumni. I want to tell you a little bit more about our distinguished panelists, and they're going to be joining us on the screen. Weijia Jiang, class of 2005, is our senior White House correspondent for CBS News based out of Washington, D.C. And David Culver, class of 2009, is a correspondent for CNN. And you'll hear from him about how he really has been traveling the world, but right now he's located in California. Brendan Hoffman, 2002, is a photojournalist in Ukraine. And then Valerie Hopkins, class of 2010, is an international correspondent for the New York Times, and she's in Moscow. So they join us from around the world. I'm going to facilitate and moderate this so that each and every one of the four panelists have time to share their experiences and also teach us based on their experiences. So we're going to start with 2 questions for all 4 of the panelists. And I'm going to ask Valerie Hopkins to start, but then I'll call on the other 3 journalists to ensure that we have an effective flow and all 4 answer this question. The first question is, what role does the media play in democracy in the United States and around the globe? Valerie?
Wow. I can't believe you did this to me, Drew. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very sorry not to be there in person, but getting in and out of Moscow is a bit tricky these days. So thank you all for assembling to listen to us talk on a big screen. I mean, this is the eternal biggest question that I think anyone can grapple with. We talked about it a lot when I was a student at William & Mary. When I went to Columbia J School, this was also a very central element of our education. But I think, you know, especially sitting here now in Moscow, a place which is not a democracy and which does not have a free press, you know, it's everything, as President Rowe already said. You know, it's the basis upon which people's ideas and opinions are formed. You know, and I arrived yesterday, and I was met by someone who didn't know that Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian activists had won the Nobel Peace Prize. There is a very severe shortage of a lack of unbiased information, and that's been going on in Russia already for 2 decades since Putin came back to power. And, you know, it's gotten us in the situation that we're in right now. watching the largest land war in Europe since World War II unfold. So I think I don't need to say very much more than without the media, you don't have a democracy, and you may eventually wind up with a more warmongering totalitarian leader. And I will speak a little bit more about, the varied opinions inside of Russia about what's going on, but a populace that is impotent to do anything, that's either supportive or impotent to do very much about the situation.
Thanks, Valerie. I have the same question next for you, David. And the question again is, what role does the media play in democracy in the United States and around the globe?
By the way, Drew, I feel like you're auditioning for a new Sunday show up there, and you probably could get it. You're doing a great job at the podium.
My CV and later today.
No, I mean, I feel like I got my cup of coffee and I can just watch as a viewer. And hi to everybody in the auditorium. I like Valerie and everyone else, wish we could be there in person. I really don't have as much of an excuse as I used to, being stuck in China and now being in LA. Just scheduling didn't work out. But to the essence of your question and the role that media plays, I think we need to first of all break up media, because there's become such a multifaceted aspect to it, right? I mean, media has become in many ways taken over by so many different platforms and individuals. I mean, you have citizen journalists and you have those of us who are career journalists, but all have become equally important in what factors into sustaining a democracy. I look at it also from a storytelling perspective. I think we can say, yes, media is really important in holding those who are in power to account and holding them responsible for their actions and what they're doing. And for me, when I was based in China, that of course meant on the international front. Domestically here, it takes a different look at everything from the hyper-local aspect to what's happening in Washington. But then there's this aspect of storytelling that is so key in breaking through the noise. And I think, if you listen to Maya Angelou says, and for me, this is being paraphrased, but it's not what you do that people remember, but how you made them feel. And I think stories have that same impact. And I think our role as journalists, as much as it is to put the questions out there and hold people to account, it's also to bridge cultures and to use stories in a way of doing that. And for me in China, it was trying to break away from saying, well, this is what China is saying, though I often would say that in a live report, but then try to break down, well, what is China and how is it made up, and who are the individuals within that, and how are their stories transcending some of the perhaps overarching narratives that are being pushed out by, say, state media. And so the challenge is going to be going forward, breaking through that noise, because there's a lot of it, and making sense of it all. And I think that's where media is going to be key going forward. It's also in this world of a lot of divisiveness, bringing healing and bridging cultures. So I would hope that that's something that we would be able to contribute to, and we're doing so in some manner.
And thank you, David, and having been such a support to the students that I've worked with over the years, having them have a chance to hear how you tell stories is skill set building in itself. And so I'm thankful to you for that. Let's go ahead and ask Brendan the same question. What role does the media play in democracy in the United States and around the globe?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is obviously a huge question. You could write books on it, and I'm sure many, many people have. I mean, I liked what David said about sort of like breaking up this concept of the media into various platforms and thinking of it as something more multifaceted and complex. I think it's also worth remembering, we live in the United States in a representative democracy, right? It's not a direct democracy. We have representatives who debate and vote on our behalf in Congress and the Senate. And in the same way, the media, it's often thought of as sort of a monolithic institution, but the media itself is also, a representative. It's a stand-in for the public. It's a stand-in for the constituents that these politicians are representing. This is the way that concerns and issues are raised and elevated and become part of the national dialogue, so that these issues can be addressed on a political level. That's sort of the essence of what our democracy is.
I think that's a really, really good point about the essence of democracy being introducing different platforms and possibilities. And so I have the same question now for Weijia Jiang, who is with the White House senior correspondent. What role does the media play in democracy in the United States and around the globe?
First, good morning to everybody, and I will echo the fellow journalists on this panel in saying sorry that I couldn't be there in person, and also thank you for having us during this very important discussion. So I think that when we think about this question and we reflect on it so much, especially in recent years, one component that we don't talk enough about is the role of the news consumer, the role of the average citizen, the role that they have in order to participate in civic engagement and allow us to celebrate, as President Rowe laid out, the freedom of expression, of thought, of conflict in a responsible way. As members of the media, macro and micro level, I think it is our duty to provide the tools and the information to the public to be able to engage in that way so that they can process arguments and make informed decisions. And unfortunately, I think what has happened and what is happening more often is that people turn to the media and outlets, various outlets, for confirmation rather than information. So they already have a thought that they believe based on their personal perspective and life experience, and they seek out someone who they view as, a credible journalist or member of the media to confirm what they already believe instead of seeking information. So it is our responsibility to provide the best information, the most accurate sides of all stories and arguments, so people can get closer to having an objective argument that really is necessary to sustain our democracy rather than to just be so one-sided. So I think, as a philosophy major at William and Mary, people often ask me, what could you possibly do with that philosophy major? But I really can't think of a better preparation for my current job as a career journalist, to be able to, as David said, sift through all the noise, to present all sides of an argument and leave it to the public to make up their own minds about these decisions that are, life-changing.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you for the next question, and then we will ask all the three other panelists to answer the same question. But it's digging a little bit deeper into what we just talked about, and it's related to democracy and in the perception or maybe the reality that there's a danger of collapse. And so we're going to ask you to sort of pull on your experiences from both domestic but also a global perspective. A recent poll suggested that majorities in both political parties think that democracy is in danger of collapse. Could you speak a little bit to what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, and how that conclusion that democracy is in danger of collapse, how that resonates with you or not? And we'll start with you, Weijia.
Yeah, I think I would just build on what I just said about confirmation versus information. And I think that the danger is that so many people who I speak with here in Washington, when I'm covering stories surrounding the White House or around the country, when I'm traveling to various rallies or events that the president attends, people are unwilling in many circumstances to be more open-minded to a diversity of thought. And that's really the danger, because that is what makes a democracy, right? That's the foundation of it. So I think, again, it's up to the average citizen to do their part. It's not just incumbent on members of the media who do this for a job. And that's the beauty of institution like William and Mary, and that's the beauty of academia, right? That we're able to have these discussions. So I think the question is, how do we transfer that to real life when we're not on campus and when that's not the environment? And I think that people are scared because they're seeing more and more that we are unable to do that. And it turns to violence, which is what we have been covering since January 6th of 2021. So, I think that right now, all I can say is we do, and I can only speak for myself, I do feel a weight and responsibility like no other time to try to get people the information they need to have that dialogue.
Thank you. I'm going to pull on that a little bit and ask David as a follow-up. David, based on your experiences around the globe and as a storyteller yourself, pulling stories, what is the story of why there becomes such an intensity of discontent to the point of violence?
So perhaps I lean on Eckhart Tolle more than Walter Cronkite in this approach, and that is, I think it's ego. I think a lot of us are attached to our own opinions, our own ideas. We hold on to that with I think such an attachment that it's such a precious commodity when we put it out on Twitter, that if somebody attacks that or somebody goes after anything that we're thinking, they are then going after us, right? And that's where we've become as a society, not only here in the US, you see that globally. And I certainly saw that in China as well. I mean, if you attack a policy or a thought or an approach to something, you're suddenly attacking that individual at their essence and their core. And that's where we need to take a step back and say, I'm not that attached to what I'm putting out there. These are, as President Rowe was saying, free-form thoughts and perhaps not totally formulated and still in the process of coming to fruition, but they're still worth putting out there and discussing, but not then fighting over and pushing away the others because they're suddenly in disagreement. I think that's where we are right now at a global level, and that's perhaps where the fear comes in, right? And if we insert in place of that humility and some detachment, then perhaps the dialogue takes a stronger shape and form and allows actually action that is rooted in agreement and compromise. But until we get to that point, I think it is a scary space, but one that ultimately perhaps could lead to something constructive. I think we can look at this and similar to I think the climate issue, right? We look at these climate stories and they're terrifying. They're doomsday. And there is reality in that. And we have to put it out there as such. But you also have to couple that with hope. And it doesn't mean you have to sugarcoat things, but you have to show that there are things happening that perhaps can fix this, that there is perhaps a way to reverse it. And I think that is also incumbent upon us as journalists and those in all aspects of media to show that there are things and individuals that are trying to make things better as well. And so that there is an avenue that you can cling on to and say, well, now, wait a minute, it's not all over. I think one of the greatest realities of all of this is that we don't awaken from our comfort zone, right? So you need these moments that rock the core and shake the foundation to say, all right, now we're informed to Weijia's point. We know what's happening and we need to take action that aligns with constructive results.
Thanks, David. As you all are looking at us, I get the blessing of being able to see the whole crowd. I want to let you all know there are a lot of head nods, there's notes being taken, and there's great appreciation for what you're sharing. So I want to continue with that. The same question now, building off of this to Valerie and then Brendan. And the question is this, what are you hearing in your international work about the perception of the health of American democracy?
Wow, people are worried, I think. I mean, there's a lot of questions and, my reporting background, I've been living more or less 12 years now outside of the US. I graduated from William & Mary, and thanks to an opportunity that I had while I was a student as a participant in what is now known as the ABC project, back then called the Bosnia project, I moved very swiftly to Bosnia and started working as a journalist. And since then, I've worked in the former Yugoslavia, in Hungary, which is now also, not considered by organizations like Freedom House to be a democracy, and now in Russia, which is an even more extreme autocracy. So one thing I wanted to say, having listening to our colleagues, is that, you know, for me, it's really frustrating to watch how all this is happening in the United States, also as a media, purely as a media consumer, but from afar, when there is a free press, and yet still the very foundations of our democracy are shaking. And I've personally had a lot of discussions with fellow journalists about, you know, what does this mean? How can this happen? You know, this is a different, so it's a kind of, the autocratic playbook is very similar, but the media and the institutions that we have are not, are not as eroded as they were in a lot of the countries that I've been working from. And I remember I was in Kosovo the day that Donald Trump was elected. And, Kosovo is a country that deeply, deeply appreciates the United States. I think the United States has like a 90% approval rating there. And people woke up and they were very shocked to see that Trump won. But all of them assured me that our institutions were so strong, you know. And 6 years later, even people that I met that aspired so much to build their country. Kosovo declared independence in 2008 after a big war with Serbia in '99. Are worried. You know, this country that we looked up to for so long, what can happen to us when this is happening in one of the oldest democracies in the world? And just to make it a bit more current, you know, I think I just came here from Berlin, where I have a semi-base as well, because my continued operations in Russia are always a little bit in doubt. So, you know, there people are very, very worried about what happens in the midterms. You know, what will happen to transatlantic support, for Ukraine, what happens to the weapons supplies that will come, but also to, you know, what happens now when I was sitting at a dinner on Thursday night in Berlin, speaking to some diplomats and think tank people, and they were saying, you know, what happens if Putin sends first nukes Ukraine, there's a nuke back in Russia, and then, you know, it comes into European territory. Where's the US going to be then? You know, I think there is the Trump administration brought a very high amount of fear that if he could win once, he could win again. And the entire security architecture that that the so-called West has built for the last 75 years is in jeopardy. And so David is looking for hope. I mean, I think there is still a lot of hope, and that people can, I don't know, that this will wake people up as well. But I have to say it's a bit scary now, and I haven't been as scared as I was in the last few weeks.
Thank you for sharing that honest and thoughtful perspective. And it is sobering. And at the same time, it's good for us to know and to hear. And I want to play on that a little bit with you, Brendan. And I want to stick with the general question around democracy and the health of democracy. But specifically, I wonder if you could speak about what you've heard and perceptions about the health of democracy based on the perceptions of what has been happening in the United States around the concerns around election fraud, and if that is something that has been considered at all based on what you're hearing.
I mean, sitting in Kiev, that is, I think, not everyone's primary concern here. This is a moment when people, I mean, it's humbling because, right, like, Americans generally do not follow the politics in other countries in the same level of detail that people in other countries follow politics in America. It's always amazing to me when I can speak to someone here and they know all of the procedures of the Electoral College and can name the Secretary of Transportation. Like, it's always, and it's humbling that people, that it means this much to people, because it really does. Obviously, the US is a very powerful country, and people here have been really grateful to the United States for the support that they've been getting. And right now, everyone's concern is basically maintaining that support. Obviously, Ukraine has plenty of experience with electoral fraud. It has not always run transparent elections. The Orange Revolution in 2004 being a major example of that. But since then, it's really become, sort of like a shining beacon of democracy. President Zelensky was elected here with 73% of the vote. Like, we do not see elections like that in the United States. I don't think people here see electoral fraud in the United States as like the main problem. I think they see misinformation and Russian interference and those sorts of issues at play. And they're concerned, of course, that those could lead to a change of opinion. They could lead to a change of administration because, the Biden administration has been doing a lot in support of Ukraine. And there's plenty of concern that a new administration or even a new Congress could really alter that situation.
Yeah, thank you. All right, the next part of this, we're going on to part 2, everybody. And part 2 is speed round. And it's not Emmy's speed round when you get your award. I'm not going to turn music on or anything like that. But what I'm going to do is 2 or 3 questions per person. So we're going to start with David. And David, we're going to go back and forth for 3 questions. So other panelists, if you feel like taking a quick nap or something, now's the time. No, please don't. But so that's what we're going to do. So David, I have 3 questions for you. And the first is this. There's a real concern about physical attacks on journalists in the United States and arrests of reporters rising sharply in 2020. We've also seen journalists targeted in other countries. How do these kinds of attacks affect the ability to gather news and report on those who hold positions of power?
I guess it depends on the individual, right? I think for some of us, if you're put in that position, and I know for some of my colleagues who have been detained and who have been really their lives put at risk, it perhaps increases the tenacity, right? It makes them want it more. It makes them more determined to want to push forward and hold those who very likely have put them behind bars and put them in places of restriction and being able to put out their work. They want to then question those individuals, I think, with a determination to not only figure out why it is they're cracking down and trying to silence the voice of the media, but moreover, what's behind that. Because if they're taking those actions, the natural next step would be to say, well, why? And what are they hiding? So I think that's what it drives more than anything else. But it is a reality, and it is something that we experience not only outside of the U.S. And I think that's something that people had come to expect, perhaps in places like China, where you are followed quite consistently and where all of our devices were tapped very regularly. But now you're seeing similar actions taken against journalists in the U.S. and in other democracies, and that is quite frightening.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the Emmy music, I've never heard that play because I've never won an Emmy, but that's all right.
Not yet. Speaking of great reporting, I remember this like truly like it was yesterday, David, is when I heard you reporting from Wuhan, probably early March, maybe late February. It truly was the first time that I recognized the seriousness of COVID. And that really speaks to when you trust someone who's on the other end of the screen, how that speaks to you. And I know you and I trust you. And when you were speaking to us, you were speaking to me and saying, the gravity of this is real. This is coming to shore. All that to be said, as I remember watching you report from your apartment in isolation, what is it like? What's a story you can share about what it's like to be in a place that doesn't necessarily share the same values as the US on free speech or freedom of the press?
It definitely makes you appreciate places like the US. I mean, I was in China altogether, posted there 3 years, 2.5 years straight without leaving. So there was a lot of reintroduction to my family over the past few months and getting to know them again, which was a challenge on a personal level. But that aside, I mean, I appreciate you saying you felt the connection and the trust, and perhaps that's on a personal level, we know each other, but perhaps that's also conveyed in the fact that my voice was trembling as I was trying to figure out how to get out of Wuhan before this city of nearly 12 million people was going to lock down. There's an aspect to all of this, and that is courage. It's not courage on part of us, the journalists. I mean, sure, I have some colleagues who are incredibly courageous. I would not put myself in that category, but rather the individuals in these countries like China who we are interviewing and who are willing to show their most vulnerable aspects and put out their names and show their faces on our broadcast, those are the ones that I look at and I say, my God, you're a special soul. Because I think about the year after Wuhan, and we went back and the world had kind of forgotten a bit about what Wuhan endured in those early days. And that was cover up, and that was mishandling. And that was individuals like Dr. Li Wenliang, who was one of the early whistleblowers, being silenced completely, being threatened with not only their jobs, but their freedoms, and being told they were going to be detained. So I think you need to look at those individuals. And that's who I think about, sitting across from a mom of a young woman who had cancer and who got what we later know as COVID early on, who had to dress up and disguise herself in hospital garb to treat her own daughter because others didn't want to touch her in the hospital, fearful of what she was carrying. And I sat across from her. She broke down into tears and I lost it. And this was not in a live broadcast, so fortunately you didn't see that on your end. But I think that there is such humanity and compassion that we lose because of that disconnect sometimes, and realizing there is true suffering outside of us, the US, and these individuals are risking so much by breaking down, sharing their stories, and then going the step further and to say, we were misled by our own government. They are responsible for what's happened. And so I think those are the ones we have to look at and say, thank you. You know, I mean, it's all you can say is carry a sense of gratitude for what they're doing.
I know we're recording this now, so we'll submit this to the Emmy folks and see what we can do for you.
Good luck. I don't know.
3 questions in the speed round for you, and then we're going to move on to Valerie. You have been so gracious with your time in supporting William & Mary students over the years. As you look back on your time at William & Mary, and as democracy is a pillar of our strategic plan, if you were to develop a class or a workshop or a program for skill set building, what do you think would have been useful for you, or what would you recommend for this generation of students?
I used to think we needed a journalism school and a communications department. That was, I think, a fallacy in thought. I don't think we needed that. Maybe more philosophy, right, Weijia? I mean, that would have helped a bit. I think I go back to kind of what I initially had made mention of. I don't mean to lean on Eckhart a lot, but I do think we need almost a lesson in detachment from our opinions. And perhaps that's something that's taught now with how prevalent social media is. And obviously, I mean, you can go beyond news and look at the damage that's done through social media, just in I think the insecurities we carry and the desire for validation and all of that. You can delve into it, but I think it is such an integral part of what new generations are coming up with and having to figure out how to relate to. I mean, it is so foreign to older generations who are still trying to now learn and catch up with social media, but it is so important nonetheless. And it doesn't mean that it's all bad. I look at social media as such an interesting case study that is one we can't ignore, but it's also not one we can demonize either, because, you know, for many years it was broadcast in particular doing what I'm doing, and that is talking to a muted audience. And that's not the reality. That's not what journalism is at its essence. It's dialogue, it's conversation, it's communication. And social media has brought that back. However, with that, there are caveats that I think when we put something out there, we hold on to it so tightly that any dislike to it is an attack on the person. And we really need to push away from that.
You had mentioned, I'm going to go to you now, Valerie, and you mentioned David had mentioned this idea around courage. And I like to define courage as stepping into something, an unknown, not sure what the outcome is going to be, but doing it because it's the right thing to do. You've interviewed a lot of people in Moscow. Is there times when you really need to embrace courage and step into a dangerous interview? And could you tell us that story?
Sure. Well, I mean, I can say that just before I left Moscow at the middle of September, I went to the border region in Belgorod, just as Ukrainians had launched this massive counteroffensive to reclaim a lot of their territory. And that maybe was a time when, you know, once you leave Moscow, you are under quite a lot of surveillance, you know, and it was made very clear from the beginning that that we were under surveillance from the moment we arrived at the train station, being photographed, to, you know, the car or two with the same license plate numbers following us everywhere we went. And, you know, I'm very privileged to have an American passport. And, you know, for me, I never felt personally very, very unsafe, but I was very concerned for every person that I spoke to, for Russian citizens working with me, who took the risk because they believe that it's important. Every time I publish someone's name in the newspaper, it's you have to navigate, will this actually damage the person for speaking up? Just as David said about people being critical of what happens in COVID, right now in Moscow, we have a situation in which hundreds of thousands of men are being called up, are being mobilized to fight in the war. And Putin gave this order on September 21st, and many people say that February 24th, the war came to Ukraine, and September 21st, it came to Russia. And there are still many people have fled, but many people have bravely spoken out. And, without them, I wouldn't be able to do my job or to report on how people truly feel, without having their voices and their names and ages and their wealth of life experience they have behind them. But this is the lightning round. I'm sorry. What's the next question?
Well, I'm going to do lightning round now over to Brendan. And because this is the audio-visual part of the show, and that is because, Brendan, you've taken some really amazing, moving and emotional photos on the ground in Ukraine. You've witnessed horrific tragedies in covering the war, and I know you've brought a few photos to share with us, and I know we have time for at least a few of those to display them on the screen, and then to maybe just have you briefly talk a little bit about what the context of that was.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to pull up my screen now. As you can imagine, it's really hard to narrow down the past, closing in on 9 years of experience here to a handful of photographs. But I want to begin with this picture that I took during the Maidan protests. That was sort of my introduction to Ukraine. This picture was just before the culmination in late February. And something that still sticks in my mind really strongly from this moment, clearly it's a very intense scene, a lot of things going on. But after I took this picture, one of the protesters came to me and said, it's really not safe for you to be here. You should move back. This is a war now. I had kind of started coming here when it was a protest that turned into a revolution. And this was the moment it became a war. And I think it's worth reiterating that the war, as we are discussing now, began on February 24th, but it's been going on for close to 9 years at this point. And I've been traveling to Eastern Ukraine since 2014. You probably all remember the Malaysia Airlines plane that was shot down, MH17. I was able to arrive on the scene just the morning after that happened. One of the first journalists to get there, and to be honest, this is still probably the most difficult and most moving and probably most traumatic stories that I've had to cover. It's a woman that we met in Donetsk in the fall of 2014. She was sort of the last person living in a building very close to the airport. Those of you who may have been following it at that time, the fight over the Donetsk airport was one of the most intense battles of the war up until sort of the current phase. But working at this point, I was working with USA Today, and we were able, through her story in the newspaper, got a lot of donations unsolicited that came in, and it was enough to move her out of the Russian occupied areas of Ukraine and buy her a house in a safer part of the country. This is just a surreal scene at a coal mine in the Russian occupied parts of Eastern Ukraine. I've spent quite a lot of time in Mariupol. That's the Azovstal steel factory there in the background. It was sort of the last stand of the Ukrainian defense of Mariupol in the spring of this year. This is a little more recent now. This is just in December of last year, a soldier on the front line in the city of Avdiivka. This is Mariupol, a puppet theater, just 1 month, but well, not even 1 month before the war began. I was in Kiev on February 24th and left. My wife was 6 months pregnant at that time, so we decided not to hang around. So we left the very next day. We weren't really even sure where we were going. Our plans kept constantly changing. But one thing we did was, on the way, I had found a list of addresses where the Ukrainian government was giving out weapons to anyone who wanted to volunteer to fight. And we just showed up at one of these places, and they allowed us in and let us photograph, as they were just, you know, taking down people's information. Here's a gun, go do your thing. Obviously, there have been thousands of funerals, tens of thousands of funerals, and I've been to more than enough of them myself. This was in Lviv in March. There's also been millions of people displaced internally and outside of Ukraine. This is a school in Western Ukraine where people who were displaced had found themselves. I was actually here working with Valerie. We're on this assignment together. This is in Irpin. After the Russian occupation there had ended, we found this woman cleaning up the street and using this destroyed Russian armored personnel carrier as a dumpster. And this is a more recent picture just from the end of August here in Kiev, a display of destroyed Russian military equipment. And I threw this in at the last minute. I took this picture about a month ago here in Kiev. That is an image that depicts, at the time, it was this fantasy, the idea of blowing up the bridge connecting Crimea to Russia, which sort of to everyone's surprise happened actually this morning. There.
Brendan, these are breathtaking, and they're also so sobering. And I want you to know that the audience is really taken by them. It's one of those moments in a program where you recognize the gravity of what we're talking about. We have about 15 more minutes, and I want to give the audience about 10 minutes time to ask questions. So Weijia, I have 2 questions for you. And then while we're answering those questions, we're going to have 2 people in the audience serve as runners to prepare for questions from the audience. So Weijia, the first question I have for you is, as you are in the White House briefing room on a regular basis, what has been a moment that has really impacted your view on the way in which democracy operates?
Honestly, I don't think there's just one moment. It's every day, every moment, especially when the pandemic was first unfolding. And I realized that the information that we were getting from the podium was going to be a matter of life and death for people as they made decisions about whether to wear a mask, about whether to isolate, about whether COVID-19 was real or not. And I remember staying up at night. I couldn't sleep because I was so obsessed with what I was going to ask during that time. What if the president had another news conference from the briefing room, which he had many? What was I going to ask that could help people understand where we are in this global pandemic? Because unlike most stories, we couldn't detach ourselves from the story. And I think that, we were living through this historic time along with everyone else. We were trying to protect ourselves and our family members, our loved ones, from getting sick just like everybody else. And I think that actually really helped to reshape, at least for me, the role that we had as journalists, because so often we're obsessed with this idea of objectivity that we don't think about enough. The people that we're covering, we try not to have those emotions and feelings, which was impossible during the pandemic, and I think has translated since then too. So every moment that I have the opportunity to ask questions, is really just so important to me. There's not just one, there's so many.
And it's really speaks, I think, to sort of the gravity of the situation and asking the questions that are going to inform our citizenry. And the last question I have for you, and then again, we'll open it up to the audience, is as much as there is probably sometimes some pushing and shoving to be able to ask questions, I sense that there's also a camaraderie among journalists, is that there's a sense of shared values. Could you speak a little bit to what might be a shared value among journalists?
Yes, I see this every day among the White House press corps. And I think there's this perception that, we're so cutthroat and we're just, bumping elbows to try to get scoops. And of course, it's a competitive field. That is, goes without saying. But we do work together in many ways because at the end of the day, our objective, our goal is exactly the same, which is, again, to hold people in power accountable, to mine for as much information that we can to share with the public. And so, oftentimes you'll see during a briefing, if a question was not answered by one of my colleagues, we will follow up and say, hey, I want to follow up on David's question because you didn't really answer it. So in that way, it is a team sport because, again, we're all working toward the same goal. And so I think that's really important. All that said, of course, I think everyone in the audience who goes to William and Mary understands we do have a competitive streak, and we do work very hard to try to break stories, but it's not in the sort of Hollywood malicious way that has been portrayed.
Right. Thank you for bringing that into clarity for us. And we're just so proud of y'all too. I mean, it's not about winning, but we're just so proud of y'all. So before we open up for questions, just a round of thanks and applause. We have let's say about 5 minutes, about five minutes. That'll give us a chance to ask a few questions. There's a number of students in the audience, and even though this is homecoming, my proclivity is to ask students to have a chance to ask some questions. So we've got a couple runners, and I see some students in the audience who'd like to ask a question.
Hi there. So Dr. Stelges mentioned a moment when he felt trust in the media when he saw Mr. Culver on screen. I was wondering, how can journalists build trust with the public in a time when there's so much mistrust in the media?
And who would you like to address that?
Anyone who feels comfortable answering.
All right, we've got, let's go ahead and have Valerie answer that.
Thank you. I mean, I think David said very well, and I think it's very interesting. I would be interested to hear also the perspective of a TV journalist compared to the perspective of a writer. I think for me, that trust often comes from a transparency, from reporting as accurately as I can about the conditions in which I'm also working, what's happening around me, who did I meet, how long did I meet them, why is someone anonymous, and also from always bearing in mind, who's reading us and how can we connect, not only what I'm, the point I'm trying to make in my story or the picture that I'm trying to paint, but directly to the people that I'm writing about, who are probably not very much different from the people who are reading. I think for me, that's always the biggest objective, to find a way to connect. For me, it's such a privilege to be able to travel, to be able to speak to people, just randomly that you wouldn't have an opportunity to in normal life. And so to connect those people in an honest way, while being honest about, what my intentions are, what my background is, where I'm coming from. But I think, as Weijia also said, it's also the job of every citizen to figure out what is their source of news, why it is that they trust, a particular journalist or a particular publication, and interact, engage with the news. At this point, we are now in a society where it's not, okay, the paper comes every day, maybe to your door, but you can, I get a lot of mail from readers who want to know more, who want to understand more. And we try to engage as well as much as we can with the people who actually buy our product and read our news.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like the next question is up here in the front.
I would like to tell our distinguished alumni that I am following their dispatches on TV and reading, and I am very impressed by their work. I also would like to ask them that they should fight with nail and teeth to preserve their right to tell the truth. I myself, after the Second World War, I was a foreign correspondent from Prague for the Hungarian newspapers. I walked the corridors of the communist world, and it was a tightrope walk. I censored every word I wrote down. And when I came to United States, and now for 40 years, I am a columnist for the Virginia Gazette, and I was never told that what I should write or shouldn't write. And it is such a precious thing that I should keep it in mind, that it is what is the basis of democracy, free press. Thank you.
On behalf of the entire Williamsburg community, we thank you, sir, for your service, and we love reading your work in the Virginia Gazette. We have time for one more question.
Oh, wow. So I'm guessing the last one. So you, Valerie, you're in Moscow. Brendan, you say you're in Kiev, and David, you said you used to be in Wuhan. So what motivated you guys to take on like such dangerous assignments in places that were potentially not maybe life-threatening, but like, that there's a chance that you may not be able to come back home for a very long time?
Great question. We'll start with you, David.
Had I known it would be 2.5 years in the gap of time that I would not see family, I would have said no. That's the truth. I think probably what motivated me was a bit of ignorance, was lack of hindsight, and was ambition and desire for something new. I mean, I had done about a dozen years in local news by that point. I was eager for a change of scene, and boy, did I get one. But I think also, and this perhaps ties in for those who are looking at the economic situation of what's happening in the country and questioning the instability and uncertainty, and especially if you're in university right now and at William & Mary watching all of this thinking, I got to enter the job market. What am I going to do? I graduated alongside, Valerie the year later, but in the midst of a recession, one in which a lot of folks, again, saw gloom and doom and uncertainty and concern. And you are not to downplay those. Those are realities and those are happening, but there's also opportunity in that. And for me, it was an opportunity that started thanks to the fostering of some of the professors and faculty who I just saw in the room there, Professor Stock, Professor Grenier, Carrie Cooper, at now running SWEM, and what's happening with the Media Center and the availability that is given in resources to students. So to have the combination of those individuals fostering what is a dream and ambition, combined with what is a very difficult economic situation, but one that opens up opportunity nonetheless. Yeah, you'll probably have to start working for quite a bit less pay, but you do it, and you do it with joy. The culmination is perhaps a career of, if not success, fulfillment.
Thanks. And we'll ask Valerie and then Brendan to also answer that question.
Thanks for the question. I think I was motivated for as long as I can remember, actually, to be a foreign correspondent in Eastern Europe and in Russia. But I actually didn't have any opportunities to visit this region or come here until William & Mary. And, you know, after sophomore year, I was able to get a grant from the Charles Center to be an intern actually in Moscow at the US Embassy here. That was my first trip to Moscow. I did it just after actually volunteering in Romania as part of the William Mary service programs. The following summer, I was able to be part of this Bosnia program that changed my life. And when I went back to Bosnia the following year, also on a grant, I believe from the Charles, maybe it was a Reef Center grant, to make sure that project kept going, I walked into an opportunity that would have me staying in Bosnia for longer. So I can't say enough about how instrumental William and Mary was, and the fact that I went to a state university and didn't graduate with massive debt, which gave me the freedom to just go abroad and start trying things out. Yeah, so motivation, yeah, I don't know. When I was sitting in those seats going to homecoming, I really wanted to be a war correspondent. Now I wish I had not had that experience, simply because I wish this war wasn't going on. But I'm very grateful to the preparation that William and Mary gave me on the way.
Thanks, Valerie. And then finally, Brendan, the same question to you.
Yeah, it's maybe similar to David. I never knew that this is what exactly I was getting myself into. When I first came to Kiev, you know, it was not a revolution, it was not a war. But I came to the story early, and I made a commitment. I think there's a trend in particular among photographers to flit around and sort of dip in and out of different stories, whatever's hot in the news. And you know, I had some desire to maybe push back against that tendency. And I think that obviously there's a ton of value in developing experience and expertise in a particular area, in a particular story, in a particular region. And so once I came here and started working, it only felt right that I would stay on the story, and regardless of what that looks like. Now, I have the ability to come in and out. Most Ukrainian journalists, you know, they are the ones that I am in awe of, that they are able to do their work while at the same time, you know, fearing for the safety of their families, fearing for the future of their country. I have some of those concerns, but it's very different for me. So I have no right to complain, and I'm here for the long haul. I think that's only right to see a story through.
Thank you. So California, Ukraine, Moscow, and DC, we brought them onto campus today virtually. And it really speaks, I think, to the ways in which we can outreach to the globe and vice versa. It doesn't happen easily, though, as well. There are experts in our technology department who have been doing great work. That booth has been busy for the last hour and a half. Talk about seamless, bringing people together from around the globe to have conversation about something that really matters. I am so grateful to all four of the panelists, and also to you, President Rowe, for providing both content, but also vision for what the future of William & Mary looks like here and around the world. And with that, we're adjourned, and I say happy homecoming. Yeah.